Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second Mongi Maduro webinar. We're very happy that we have so many participants. My name is Monique Alberts, and I'm the manager of the Mongi Maduro Foundation Library. Sorry, not of the foundation, the library. We're so happy that we have this topic to share with you this afternoon because monuments are very important. There was a French philosopher, Joseph Joubert. He once said, monuments are the grappling irons that bind one generation to one another. And this is especially true for the historic inner city of Willemstad. The monumental buildings in our city bind many generations together because the city center has maintained its integrity since the period 1650 to 1800. And it's no wonder that Willemstad has been registered as the prestigious UNESCO World Heritage Sites list since 1997. But our historic inner city center is under threat. More and more buildings are in disrepair. If no action is taken, our grandchildren will no longer be able to enjoy our unique city center, unique inner city of Willemstad. Luckily, we have NGOs such as Curaçao Heritage Foundation and the Curaçao Monument Fund Foundation who work hard to reverse this trend. Unfortunately, the decision makers on our island, they do not see the urgency of this situation. So as Mongi Maduro Library, we are very happy that we found monuments experts, Michael Newton, willing to shed light on this problem and come up with some solutions. As you probably know, Michael is the founder of Newton Heritage Consulting. This is a consultancy firm focused on the broad field of World Heritage conservation and heritage education. Michael has worked as a heritage consultant in many Caribbean countries. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. And I now give the floor to Michael Newton.
Thank you, Monique, for the introduction. You hear me well, I hope?
I forgot to tell you that if you have questions, you can put them you can write them in the chat, and that the presentation will be recorded, so we will send it to you afterwards.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, webinarians, as we are called nowadays, welcome to this presentation. It's a presentation about, as the title already says, Willemstad, a challenge to preserve. And I will show you a few things, but also the challenge we have nowadays. It's about Willemstad, the capital of Curaçao. And my presentation consists of 4 chapters. That's the historic Willemstad itself, how it developed and how it is nowadays, the decline in the mid-20th century, the recovery efforts from the 1980s, and the last decade after 2010. If we look at the city itself, the historic Willemstad, that's how it looks also. First, I want to show you about the urban development from the 17th till the 20th century. Willemstad really, historic Willemstad really consists of 4 districts: Punda, the oldest one, Pietermaai, Schallo, and Ochobanda. The oldest one is Punda, as I told you, and Punda really developed after 1634, the year that the Dutch captured the island from the Spaniards. And one of the first things they did, they built the Fort Amsterdam near the entrance of the harbor of the St. Anna Bay to protect the harbor against attacks from sea. So the Fort Amsterdam itself is also the oldest building we have over here. In the 17th century, north of the fort, the city of Willemstad was created. And Willemstad always, till the mid of the 19th century, was a walled-in city. Willemstad had walls around it, which made it difficult to expand. So for years, Willemstad was packed into its city walls. Only on the Sint-Annabay side, on the water side, the city was open because there the ships had to embark and disembark their products. If you look at the situation now, you can see that how the city wall was running. It started near the Fort Amsterdam, to the northeastern bastion, the point, the corner of the fort, going to the east, then through the present Columbusstraat to the north. Over here you see the synagogue, and then through the present Madurostraat it went to the west again, and the wall ended at the present Plaza George Correa near the Maduro Cereals Bank headquarters, head office. So Willemstad itself was a very small walled-in city, and it was the walls itself was demolished in the 60s of the 19th century. Because Willemstad was also always surrounded by its walls for decades, around 1700 the city was already full. So people started living outside the city walls, and that's how from the beginning of the 18th century, 3 suburbs were created, the Pietermaai area in the east, Scalo and Otrobanda. And we can see it also on a map of mid of the 18th century. You see the Fort Amsterdam, you see the Willemstad itself, Pietermaai area, the Scalo area north of the Wijngaard, that inner water, and on the other side of the Sint-Annabay, on the other side of the water, the Otrobanda, the other side, as a suburb of Willemstad. Till the beginning of the 20th century, these suburbs were officially suburbs. They were not part of Willemstad. A former colleague of mine, Mrs. Asta Spekkens, made a nice presentation of how the city was developed. And you can see it over here in 1635, the Fort Amsterdam. Then 1675, the city was started with its walls around it. Beginning of the 18th century, it was full already. Then mid of the 18th century, the suburbs were created and were filled in. Later on, you can see also that the inner water was filled in mid of the 19th century. Beginning of the 20th century, larger and larger, and especially going up to on the hill of Otrobanda, the buildings. Mid of the 60s, and this is how it looks nowadays. A much larger part also because of the fill-in of the Wijngaard, but also of the Rif area there on the Otrobanda side. Again, a small and nice example of how urban-wise this city developed. If you look at the architecture of Willemstad, also from the 17th to the 20th century, just a small review of the architecture we will find over here. But if you want to look and have a better look of all the monuments, all the listed monuments on Curacao, go to the website curaçaomonuments.org, not now, but afterwards. Go to the website and you will find all listed monuments on Curacao, but also the listed monuments in historic Willemstad. But also much more information you will find on this website. It was reviewed recently, and the new website was launched in December, so it's new. If we look at the architecture, the 17th century architecture, this is the postal museum in the center of Punda, with one of the first type of gables, the architectural gables, which you will find over here. This is before it was restored, but because you can see very clearly the date in top of it, 1693, that's when this building was built in the center of Punda. And as far as we know, this is also the oldest building in Punda. Maybe there are other ones, but we haven't found buildings with an older date than this one, 1693. In the 18th century, known for the Curacao Baroque, as we call it, really influenced also by the Netherlands. well, the main building, the most famous one is, of course, the Peña building. But that Curacao Baroque is especially typical are those curved lines in the top gables, but also, for example, all these arches are typical for the Curacao Baroque. And if we look at the side gable of the Peña building, we can see this one. You can see that curved line and even curling up, a volute. And these same examples you will also see in the Netherlands. This is the so-called Zaanstreek. This is in the northern of Amsterdam. And you can see the same curls, which has really a resemblance with the Peña building. So the Dutch influence is clear, according to my opinion. Of course, the Sephardic synagogue, built in 1732. Also, the top gables have those curved lines. It was built in the middle of the Baroque period, so clearly they also used those curved lines, which we know from the Curacao Baroque. But also Notre Banda, building of Sebastopol, you see on those top curved lines, the semi-circular things, but also, for example, these arches, typical for the Curacao Baroque in the 18th century. In the first half of the 19th century, the architecture became much simpler. And for example, this is a building in Notre Banda, where you can see this gable is very simple, but also those dormers are very simple. And this very simple architecture we will find through the whole first half of the 19th century. And because that was also the period that a lot of buildings were built in Notre Banda, you will find this architecture a lot in Notre Banda. Then the second half of the 19th century, the Curacao neoclassicism in the second half of the 19th century, something completely new again. It was really influenced by you coming from Europe, but also from the United States. And you will see a lot of examples in the areas of Willemstad. For example, this one in Notre Banda. This is a Belvedere building. This one in Pietermaai, the main office of the Ministry of Finance. In Schalo also, again, examples of that neoclassical architecture. But again, as I told you already, if you want to see more of this kind of architecture, please go to the website. Then the 20th century, the modern architecture, and this is really the first building which still exists, built in that modern architecture in the 20th century in the center of Willemstad. Of course, outside the city, there were a lot of other modern buildings, but in the inner city itself, this one was the first one, built as a customs office, as it is nowadays still. So it didn't change any of the function. It's still the customs office, and it was built by the architecture of public works. So it was really a government constructed building. Another one, what we call the KNSM building. It was the office of the Koninklijke Nederlandse Stoombootmaatschappij, a shipping company which had its headquarters in Amsterdam and was shipping goods from Europe to the West Indies. And in the West Indies, this Curacao was the head office. So this is the building of the head office in the West Indies of the KNSM. Another building well known nowadays, the Sinalandia building, built in the Art Deco style of that time. Also modern architecture. And this is without any doubt influenced by the Miami Art Deco in Miami Beach. You will find all kinds of architecture like this. And all these things, this urban development, but also this architectural development with a lot of authentic buildings still, was one of the reasons that Willemstad was put on the UNESCO World Heritage List in December 1997. Sorry, cancel. Sorry. And UNESCO has different criteria for to be listed. And these criteria must match with the outstanding universal value. They must prove the outstanding universal value of Willemstad. That's the outstanding words. Outstanding universal value are really, well, every World Heritage professional knows these words, because the first thing you have to do to prove that you can be listed on the World Heritage List is that you have to prove your outstanding universal value. And in this case, I want to mention two of the criteria which were used for Curacao, is that the historic area of Willemstad is considered a European colonial ensemble in the Caribbean with outstanding value and integrity, which illustrates the organic growth of a multicultural community over 3 centuries. So that's interesting, the multicultural community, which we can find within the historic areas of Willemstad. And the second one is that the 4 historic districts show the subsequent stages of historical development over the course of centuries. So again, these 4 historic districts, which I mentioned, you can still see that they were developed differently, and it's still visible. Poona is much condensed than, for example, Schouwlou, but that was from the beginning was the case. So these are 2 of the criteria why we're on the World Heritage List. Then my second chapter is the decline in the mid of the 20th century. What happened? The decay of Willemstad. After establishment of the Shell refinery in 1915, Curacao knew decades of economic prosperity, but also a population explosion. In half a century, the population grew from some 26,000 to 100,000. So the population quadrupled. That meant that also new neighborhoods had to be built. They were built outside the historic districts, of course, and there was a spread of new neighborhoods around the historic district of Willemstad. But at a certain moment, this also meant a depopulation of the historic districts. People left the old city and went to live in newer areas, new districts, new houses, often with more space, more wind, and it was nicer to live outside the historic districts than within. And this meant for historic Willemstad a decay during the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. And we can show that with these pictures. These are pictures from the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, even the beginning of the 1990s, how large parts of Willemstad looked like, and especially not Poona itself. Poona was always a commercial area, which was not in that bad shape, but all the other districts, like Schouwlou, Pietermaaie, and Ochobanda, all new areas looking like this. And again, once I walked with UNESCO people over here, this is part of Ochobanda, and they asked if this area was bombarded once. That's how bad it looked in the time. But another thing which, well, helped negatively with the decay of Willemstad was the highway going through the old city. That was bulldozed through the old districts of Ochobanda in this case, to get to the bridge, the new bridge on top. But it wasn't really nice anymore to live a few meters from this highway. So that also helped, was part of the decay of Willemstad. But also the social riots on 30th May 1969, when parts of Poona, but also especially in Ochobanda, you can see it over here, the Place Brillon, how it looked just after the fires of the social riots in Ochobanda, in Curacao. And again, it was a lot of destruction in these areas. And if you look at this picture, Ochobanda, this is the Broad Street, the Bredestraat. It looks like it was also really bombarded. It looks like the Middle East sometimes over here. So again, a decay helped. All these things helped with the decay of Willemstad. Then in the 1980s, recovery efforts were made, and it was really the start of the urban renewal in the mid-1980s started really by private initiative, especially the parish of Ochobanda, the Santa Familia, and the people of Ochobanda, united in the Plataforma Ochobanda, said, well, we have to do something. It cannot stay like this. So they took the initiative to talk with the politicians, talk with other people, had to get Ochobanda and other areas on its feet again. The Curaçao Monuments Foundation, which was already established in 1954, helped also, took the initiatives to start restoring. And after that, the island government followed with the Curaçao Housing Foundation, the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, and the Urban Redevelopment Secretariat, which was established in 1989. And again, all these organizations did their utmost to get Willemstad on its feet again. And these were one of the first projects, well, I think it was really the first project of Monumentenzorg within Ochobanda. You see the before and after, how it looked before and how it looks after, and it still looks because they maintain their houses. But also the Housing Foundation at that time, they don't do anything at this moment, but at that time, did a lot of restorations in Ochobanda before and after. And another thing which I want to mention, which is very important, is that in 1990, the government approved a monuments plan. And before that, it was really only urban renewal, but it wasn't looked really at the buildings themselves as monuments, as heritage. That really changed in 1990 when the government approved the monuments plan. And I have to say, and I really want to compare it with the present situation, which I'll talk about afterwards, is that from the monuments plan paper, the monuments plan, almost everything which was mentioned in this plan was done, was executed. And so in 2, 3, 4 years, all the intentions mentioned in this monuments plan were executed. And one of the first things is, of course, the Monuments Ordinance of Curaçao, the Monumentenverordening, which was reviewed in 1990. There was an old one which never functioned, but in 1990 the new one was installed, and it also gave the possibilities to start listing monuments, and quite some buildings were listed in a few years. Besides that, also the protected cityscape with the island development plan, the EOP, Eilandelijk Ontwikkelingsplan, was set on its feet, and it also helped. But besides that, also the organizations necessary to implement all these plans were put on their feet. At the urban department, the Monuments Bureau was set up in 1990, a Monuments Council in 1990. In 1992, the Monuments Fund, Monumentenfonds, was established, giving the possibilities to finance private people who want to restore their buildings. And initially working a lot with money from the Netherlands, because they wanted to invest in Willemstad to get Willemstad on its feet again. But also Stadsherstel was one of them, established at that time. Again, all these organizations were mentioned in the monuments plan and were set up. And as I told you, the monuments ordinance and the monuments ideas gave the possibility to list buildings. This is Willemstad, and the dark blue dots are the listed monuments, and the light blue ones are the non-listed ones. And you see that almost, well, it's approximately half of the buildings in the inner city nowadays are listed. Again, new restoration projects after the monuments plan. Over here in Schalo, the office, the present office of Stadsherstel, again, before and after. New social housing was introduced. The area which was devastated by the riots of 1969, new buildings were constructed around the year 2000. And so a lot was done in these decades after the monuments plan was installed. Private people, private enterprises really started restoring, especially in Pietermaai. The Pietermaai area is almost completely restored by private initiative. And these were one of the first ones in 2005, which were restored with the financial help of the Monuments Fund. Another example, a building in the center of Pietermaai, destroyed by fire and restored in 2006 with financial help of the Monument Fund, but again, private initiative. In the alleys of Pietermaai, it looked like this. This was not only one area, but a lot of these alleys looked like this, and it was a big problem. Private initiative, 2011 this case, restored these buildings. And Pietermaai partly became a tourism attraction for people who don't want to live or want to stay in the luxurious hotels near the beach, but really want to stay in the historic district. And again, the restorations keep on going. This is Pietermaai. This is Pietermaai 2012, the same building restored by private initiative. This is how it looks nowadays. And I told you already, one of the important things which was done was in the 1990s especially, was the Dutch money invested in Willemstad because they saw the importance of a functioning inner city because of tourism. And the economic factor, besides that, of course, the economic impact are the jobs for restoration and maintenance. The maintenance industry is really a ongoing process, maintenance of these buildings, but that means also jobs. The rehabilitation of the areas, which meant that empty buildings got new functions, they became productive again. And as I told you, tourism, it's not only the sun and the sand Curacao has to offer to the tourist, but also it's his heritage city. And besides that, something new, which I think has to be promoted more, is the heritage tourism. Often well-to-do people who only visit World Heritage sites all over the world, and that's a nice thing. They go every time they go on a vacation, they go to a World Heritage site, and again, Willemstad can use the tourism organizations can use this heritage tourism as one of the products they can promote. Okay, the last decade. After 10-10-2010, what happened, for the ones who don't know, 10-10-2010, the constitutional situation of Willemstad changed. The Netherlands Antilles didn't exist anymore. Curacao got a new type of government. And well, it wasn't for the best, at least if you look at heritage management. I have split this part into three parts: the government, the NGOs, and the private sector. If we look at the government, the question, by the way, the general question is, how doable is the preservation of our heritage? And that becomes a challenge. And the present challenge are, among others, the next things, the Monuments Bureau. As I told you, the Monuments Bureau, or I haven't told you, the Monuments Bureau isn't there anymore. At 10-10-10, it was eliminated. There's no Monuments Bureau at this moment. There are a few people working within the planning department who have heritage management on their as one of their tasks, but there's no really one office, especially at the government, especially for monuments. And that means that it isn't a priority anymore. And that's a big problem. And we have a UNESCO World Heritage City, and I have to say that the government doesn't have an organization really who manages this World Heritage City. The Monuments Bureau isn't there anymore. There's another problem that the Heritage Ordinance of 1990 has to be reviewed. And quite some years ago, we started with the process to review it, but at this moment, it's not. It's still in a concept, and the government did not manage after almost 6 years to get this ordinance, this new reviewed ordinance, fixed. Another thing is activating a management of Willemstad. I will talk about it afterwards, but also about a city manager. That's another thing. Another problem is at this moment that although you think that the organization of the government got smaller, the process for obtaining permits got longer. The red tape for getting these kinds of permits got longer and broader, not smaller and thinner. And again, I urge the government to look at it, get the permit process fixed, to get it smoother. They know about it, but the decisiveness or non-decisiveness to fix these kinds of problems, which they know about, the urgency isn't seen. Another problem, of course, which was always there, the property owners themselves still doing nothing. You still have property owners doing nothing. And the last one I want to mention is more education and public awareness, but that's a general thing, of course. An example of the non-decisiveness is the so-called Erfgoednota, a new heritage policy document, which was written by the Monuments Council in 2012, 8 years ago, with a lot of new propositions and new things which should be done, new projects with steps to be taken to improve the heritage management. It's still not approved by government and it's still not implemented. Again, the urgency is not there. And that means, for example, that still you will find buildings like this, privately owned, but there's no enforcement anymore because the Monuments Bureau isn't there anymore. The enforcement is minimum, and that means that areas like this one in Pietermaai, which is standing within the other buildings which have been restored, is in the shape like this. Another one, also in Pietermaai, recently with the heavy rains in November, even the roof of this building collapsed. But again, nothing really, no pushing, no enforcement by the government. But the government themselves, this is a building, Kortijn, in the western part of Otrobanda, in the historic part of Otrobanda, owned by the government. It used to be, it had different functions, but it's empty for at least 25 years now. And there are a lot of intentions to do something with it by the government. Maybe they want to sell it, maybe they want to do anything else, something else, but no decisions are taken. No decisions are taken. No sense of urgency. And another example is, of course, owners doing nothing. This is, this was in the newspaper recently, La Moda de Paris, in the Conscientiestegen in Otrobanda. You see the building on the left, which was already reinforced with these iron bars to keep it up. But with the heavy rains in November, even those iron bars couldn't hold it anymore. And the whole facade just collapsed, as you can see over here. But not only the facade, but also the building next to it is in a very bad shape. I'm sorry, Monique is telling me something. Sorry. Okay. It's in a very bad shape, and although the building, the front gable, collapsed within the alley, still the alley isn't cleaned up by the government, and you cannot cross it. Again, no sense of urgency. Other examples in Schalo, a building where almost all the floors are stripped, and again, nothing is being done. And then I mentioned the management plan. It's something which is required by UNESCO. Every city, every site should make its own management plan. And in 1997, when Willemstad was listed, it was not required yet at that time by UNESCO, but it is for quite some decades now already. And it took quite some years for Willemstad, for Curaçao government to make a management plan. And the management plan was approved in 2016 by the Council of Ministers, but nothing mentioned in this management plan was executed. Still nothing is implemented about it. So again, paper, maybe megabytes, but no sense of urgency by the government. Another requirement following from the management plan is a site manager. Every UNESCO site needs a site manager, or city management as we call it over here. A city manager who coordinates with all the key stakeholders in a city to get things done. And it is mentioned in the management plan. Again, the management plan was approved, but there still is not site or city manager for Willemstad. By the way, in every larger American city, you have a city manager. In the Netherlands, you have for every city, larger city, you have a stads management, a binnenstads manager, but on Curaçao, we only have it on paper. No sense of urgency. And that means that alleys like this, nobody cares about it, and it just stays. And again, examples of not only things like this the city manager has to look up on, but also the coordination between all the organizations working in the inner city. Now you have, of course, the building owners, you have the inhabitants, you have the Tourism Development Foundation, you have the merchants, you have the garbage collector, you have a lot of organizations all working in that inner city, but you need kind of a coordination to get things done properly. And for example, over here in the harbor, you have a Curaçao Port Authority, and also the manager should become an authority by law, so they can do things. Without any authority, you can be an organization, but you will not succeed. So plans are there to come with a city management by law, but again, not yet. Other problems which we encounter. Bricks taken away to fix something underground, but they are not put back. And the latest plan made by the government, it's because of the urban agenda of the Third Habitat Conference in Quito. A plan made by the United Nations Office for Project Services together with the local government in 2019. It was published, but still now not implemented. Again, examples of things which should be done and can be done if there is the willingness to do it. It's not always money that's lacking, it's the willingness to do it and the implementation to have things implemented. We can resort with a monuments plan. It can be done in a few years, but at this moment, it's after 10-10-10, something stuck. But okay, not everything is negative. If I look at the NGOs, you have two. This is a list of all the NGOs we know working with heritage in the city on Curaçao also. But I want to mention the first two ones: the Stichting Monumentenzorg Curaçao and the Stichting Monumentenfonds Curaçao. The Stichting Monumenten Johan Curaçao was founded in 1954, a complete private organization, doesn't get any funding from the government at this moment. And what they do, they buy buildings or they get buildings, most of the time buildings which are in very bad shape. And if Monumentenzorg doesn't step in, without any doubt, they would disappear. But Monumentenzorg just steps in and restores the buildings and give them a new function. And at this moment, they have approximately 130 monuments being of their own. And these renting out of these monuments gives them the financial background to keep on restoring buildings. So for the inner city, but also for the heritage in general in Curaçao, a very important private organization. Examples of projects they did recently in the Sebastopolstraat in Ochobanda. This is a restoration as it was taking place in 2019, but from a family which couldn't take a decision. At the end, they took a decision finally when the building was in a bad shape to sell it to Monumentenzorg. Other example in Ochobanda, the Stupi Haltubar, also restored by Monumentenzorg. And this is their last project. It's their headache project, without any doubt. It's that collapsed building, La Mode de Paris, which just a few weeks ago was bought by Monumentenzorg to get it on its feet again. But again, it will take a few years before they can fix it. It's finished, but I know they are working on it already to get La Mode de Paris and its neighbor building. That is an opposite. That's also part, you don't see it that much, that good, but this one is also in a very bad shape. These are two buildings which in the center of Ochobanda, which are nowadays in the hands of Monumentenzorg. Then the private sector, together with the Stichting Monumentenfonds Curaçao. For the private sector, there are a few incentives for heritage preservation. And we've seen that, the Monumentenfonds, initially funded by the Netherlands and the local government, founded in 1992. And at this moment, approximately 235 buildings were financed, and the process was guided by Monumentenfonds in the last decades, and more to come. But an important organization, if one of you have a monument and you want to restore, you want to maintain, go to the Monumentenfonds and you'll get the advice and get, hopefully for you, also some money to restore it. There's some 65 million US they have invested in the Curaçao monuments, of which 24 million was a subsidy, there's a grant, which you don't have to pay back, and 40 million as a loan. So part of the money comes back to the Monuments Funds, and that's how they can keep on functioning. Something else I want to mention, that's since a few years, there are tax incentives, which can be very prosperous, very interesting for monument investors, for the historic city as a whole, so for all the buildings in the historic Willemstad, and for all rest of the monuments on the island. So if you're interested, go to your tax advisor or look at the website curaçaomonuments.org. It's also mentioned over there. Examples, recent examples of restorations which took place with financing of the Monument Fund. This is Pietermaaien. And by the way, this is now the office of the Curaçao Financial Group, who also invests in monuments in Pietermaaien. Very nice building with a very bad shape. Finally bought by someone who saw the possibilities and rented out to the Curaçao Financial Group. And this was a picture of yesterday, just recently restored again, and in a top shape. And I understand it will be an art gallery on the ground floor soon. So again, examples of private initiatives for restoring the building. So I want to end at least this part with the positive thing is that restorations are taking place, but most of the things are privately driven. To really end, I want to mention the heritage education as a constant. It has to be a constant process on all levels to get the awareness for the QSR people to get aware of the importance of our heritage. And recently, just last year, a program was something for the primary schools was produced. It's digital. It's Cucho de Ochobanda. It can be used for all schools the first 1, 2, 3 years of the primary school. Just look it up, www.Cucho de Ochobanda, and it's a very nice story. It's drawings where you will find Cucho going through the alleys of Ochobanda with his friend, the iguana Yubi, doing all kinds of naughty things, but also looking at the monuments. So it's a nice thing for small children to look at. Besides that, the University of Curacao also had the Education in Heritage course, which should be revised by now and will be revised. And just a few weeks ago, Professor Dr. Rosemary Allen was introduced as a new professor at the University of Curacao with a special chair, Culture, Community, and History. So we hope that also with her help, we can improve the heritage education for Curacao. Again, the website, curaçaomonuments.org, and thank you all.
Yes, my mic is not on. Thank you very much, Mashadanki, Michael, for your very interesting presentation. I'm not the only one saying that. We have quite some comments here that are commenting you, congratulating you on your interesting presentation. This was indeed a very interesting talk about how Willemstad became Willemstad, and how if we don't pay good attention to it, it won't be our Willemstad anymore. And I want to start with a question, because I do know you ended the presentation with the importance of awareness. And one of the places that awareness is being raised is at the University of Curacao, where Professor Dr. Rosemary Allen is actually present now, attending with a group of students at this webinar. And as they have to sign off at 5, I want to present their questions first, which is the question they have is, in which way can the inhabitants be more involved in the preservation of the monuments, especially considering that it's part of our cultural heritage?
I have to raise the speakers over here. I'm sorry, because I don't hear you very well.
Could you hear my question? Can you hear me better now?
Not yet.
Huh?
Okay, just try it again.
Yes, can you hear me better now?
No, not really, but I'll hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Yes, the question was a question I have from Rosemary, Professor Dr. Rosemary Allen, with her students who are following your presentation at the university now. And the question is about how can inhabitants be more involved in preserving our monuments, especially considering they are part of our cultural heritage?
Well, that's a thing we are working and talking about for decades already. One of the steps which are being taken by Fundación Pro Monumento already since the 1990s is the so-called Open Monuments Day. That an area is chosen where Fundación Pro Monumento tries to cooperate with the inhabitants to open up their monuments to let the visitors also look inside. And it's working, but the one because there would be a new one in 2020, but it was postponed because of Corona. But But again, that's one possibility. And the thing is, we are education at schools. The National UNESCO Committee has a work group, education. And within this group, we're trying to produce for the schools more information material, more schoolmateriaal. And the Cucho de Otobanda was the first one. And the intention is for all the schools, for all levels of education, to have education material which can be used on the schools also, because that's where it starts. On the schools, heritage awareness starts in the schools. And again, that's the idea is to make more lessons, more material which schools can be used in school can be used for heritage education. But besides that, of course, don't forget really that it's not only the larger buildings which are being restored, for example, with money of the Monuments Fund. In Ochobanda, a lot of, well, people with modest income also restored their buildings. When at the moment they know about it, they find their way to get the financing done. And again, that's very important to know that it's not only the larger buildings of the richer people, if you can call it that way, being restored, but also the modest buildings. And we have a lot of examples. Also, look at the website; you will see them of buildings being restored from people who have been living there for decades. Yeah. But it's one of the most important things, of course, the awareness building for heritage. And that's, I hope we can work together with Professor Dr. Rosemary Allen.
Yes, I'm sure she's willing. She's following us, you know. And in the context of awareness raising, I have here a question from Ron Gomez Cáceres, also congratulating you on your great talk. And it's about up to and in the 80s, you mentioned repeatedly that the private sector created the momentum with private renovation and conservation. This happened in Otobanda, as you mentioned, in Pietermaritzburg, and also in a lesser extent in Scarlo. So what changed in the last decade to have noted that now private sector owners do nothing? Or what can be done to re-energize the private sector instead of depending on government to do so? And I'm combining with this a question of cost per tronc, which is a bit related with that. Maybe you can also answer that in that sense, his question about, he is wondering what could be the role of the kingdom in the revitalization of historic Willemstad, since it is UNESCO World Heritage Site of the site. Yeah.
Well, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, to start with the last question, is from in the beginning was quite involved, but don't forget, we have to do it ourselves to start with. That's at least that's my opinion, and that means also that we have to take the first steps also. Most of the time, especially in the 90s, the Dutch were willing to cooperate financially, and I think if you have good projects at this moment, they will still be willing to cooperate. But the awareness building, for example, is something we have to do ourselves, and don't forget that. How you can get the private owners restoring again? Well, one of the last initiatives from the side of the government was the tax incentives, which can be quite interesting for people who want to invest in Willemstad. But at a certain moment also, you will need to implement and enforce the people and let them know that they have to do something. They cannot let their building go, let the building go, and that they have to do something. And well, sometimes you have to do it a little stronger than it's done now, because at this moment it is not done at all. And especially families which have the so-called undivided properties is a problem in the city and the rest of Curaçao. That means that you have property which was from great grandfather, and he died, and it was not divided under the children. And sometimes you have property which has 20, 30, 40, 50 owners. And at a certain moment, nobody feels responsible anymore to do something. And that happened, for example, in the La Moda de Paris and the Conscientiesteg, where it was still undivided property. There was one guy who wanted to do something, but the rest of the family didn't cooperate. And there are laws since a few years also to resolve this undivided property, but it needs steps by one or two members of the family to get it done. So it's not easy. You have to go to the judge often, have to get things loosened, but it's possible with these undivided properties. But again, most of the time, nobody of the family finds itself responsible. I hope I answered it a little bit.
Yes, it sounded clear. We will, if it's not possible clear, then we'll look at the chat again and see if there's still a question about that. I have a different question. You talked about social housing.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my headphones.
Oh, okay.
Hear better, I think. Okay, let's try it.
Yes, you hear me better?
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I have a question here from Ms. Patricia Elaine Green, and she's asking about if you could explain more what you meant with social housing. What social group of persons live there? And it seemed that the area became gentrified, moving out one lower social group and replacing with a higher economic social group. So if you could elaborate a bit about that.
Well, the social housing itself is still for the lower income people, especially in Ochobanda, where the Housing Foundation restored a lot of buildings in the 1990s. It's still the lower income people living over there in Ochobanda. So and it was restored restored by the Housing Foundation. So it's not. I'm not agree with. Is it Patricia Green? I understand who put the question. My friend from Jamaica, I understand. That's who is asking. I don't hear you, Lian. You're muted. Yes.
Yes, it's Patricia Green indeed.
Okay. Hi, Patricia. Again, it's not. These buildings are still used for social housing. And it's a pity, by the way, that the Housing Foundation, who did a lot of restorations in Ochobanda in the 1990s, after 10-10-10 stopped doing so. They have other priorities now, building, but still they have quite some houses in the inner city of Ochobanda which are in a bad shape and are empty. And we talked a lot with the CEO of the Housing Foundation, but till now they didn't do that much to get these houses restored. And again, for social housing, that's again, it's in Ochobanda, it's still lower income people living there.
Okay, and again, two questions in one, because I have here Hermina Douglas, who's asking whether there is no law that the government can demolish a very old building in disrepair. So do they have to go to the court for this? For example, Cinelandia, La Moda de Paris, and let the owners pay for the demolished work and clean up. And in that sense, I have also a question from Mike, and who is asking, how do you define preserving authenticity of an old building? By looking at the original design of the use of original materials?
Well, the thing is, we don't want people to demolish their buildings to start with, especially if they are listed. You cannot demolish it just like that. You need a demolishing permit if you want to demolish a building. But also in the inner city, which is UNESCO area, to demolish a non-listed building, you need a permit. And you have to prove the government before they can give the permit. What new plans do you have? What kind of new construction you want to build on the location of this building which you want to demolish? But again, then I'm talking about non-listed buildings. in principle, listed buildings, we don't want them to be demolished. And the Sinalandia, it is another question, of course, because over there, most of the people think have the idea, and it's questionable, but okay, that it's not possible anymore to have it restored. But in that case, it can be rebuilt. It is listed. It can be rebuilt with the same material and the same details and the same measures and details as it is now. And that's something we worked with ICOMOS, that's an international organization of monument professionals. And ICOMOS has the guidelines in what way is it acceptable, again, acceptable, not preferred, but acceptable to demolish a building and rebuild it again. That's on Curacao. We did it with the wooden structure Luna Park in the Caracas Bayweg, which was completely finalized. I mean, it was eaten by termites, and at the end, even a truck drove in it. So there was no possibility anymore to rebuild it, but it was rebuilt, first measured and rebuilt in the original way as it was, and it's still listed, by the way. In that way, it's still listed.
Okay. And yeah, talking about rebuilding, you're going to need funds for rebuilding. I have here a question from Anastasia, who's asking, where did the government get the funds for the monument plan or for the fund in 1990s? And why did they stop the Bureau in 2010? What was the motivation for that to stop that?
Well, the financing in the beginning was three ways. Dutch money in the beginning of the 1990s, Dutch money, government money, and the local financial institutions also funded the monument fund with loans, profitable interest rates. And that's how, from three sides, the monument fund in the beginning got its funding. At a certain moment, all the loans from the banks were paid back. The Netherlands stopped with their contribution. And at this moment, although they lowered the amount of money, they still get money from the government. But because of the system which was set up for the monument fund, a revolving fund was created in the 1990s, which means that part of the money comes back. And that's the way the monument fund at this moment, most of the time, functions. And it functions. They have, at this moment, if you want to restore a building and you're going to the monument fund, they still have money for you to invest in your restoration. So money for private initiatives is not the biggest problem. It's the intention to do something, the willingness to do something. Again, that's the main thing, not the financial part. Yeah. And the second question was why the Monuments Bureau was eliminated. Yeah. That's stupidity, I would say. It was with the whole reviewing of the whole new government of Curacao, with the various new ministries being set up. Maybe you can say they forgot about it, but I don't think they forgot about it. It was not the most prioritized thing to do. And they thought it could be managed by the urban planning department, but it could not. It's the people who are working now with heritage from the side of the government, still working for the urban department. But again, that's only part of their work. That's not their main thing. And that's the problem, that you don't have professionals only working on heritage preservation on Curacao.
Yeah. And because about rebuilding, we have a student, I hope they're still there. A student is asking how they, as students, as young people especially, can be involved in the restoration, because you have one part of awareness, and now they're aware, and how can they be actively involved in the restoration of our monuments?
Study.
Yes,
study well and
maybe they should contact your bureau.
Well, with the Monument Fund and others, and Monument and Zorg. But again, I worked at the Monument Fund for years, but afterwards, the people who took over, one of the main guys, studied at the university over here. And with that course of education in Erfgoed heritage education, was his enthusiasm was triggered, and he went to the Monument Fund and asked after when he finished his bachelor in construction, he went to the Monument Fund and asked if he could work with us, and well, there was a possibility. So he stepped in, and he's one of the best ones at this moment. So again, education on all levels. Also the technicians we need. And it's sometimes difficult because you don't have all the material to study as it should be. But we need these heritage professionals who are willing to step in and to do the job in the future.
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. I have one question for Ronnie Lobo, who's that's a good question because it's interesting because you indeed have a very interesting picture behind you. If you could please explain that picture and why it's not there, where it's supposed to be, and why it's not there anymore. And another interesting question from Eva Peterson, who's asking whether Plaza Hotel is a monument.
Okay. What you see behind me is an interesting building, and Ronnie recognizes, of course. It's the other Art Deco building, which we had in the city over here. It's the cinema, the West End Cinema. I just found this picture last week, so I just put it behind me. And unfortunately, this building was demolished also because the owners were not willing to protect it, to keep it. Even Fundación Monumento started a court case to stop it, but the judge decided otherwise. So it was demolished, and the idea of the owner of that time was to build something new on that location. But if you know the location, it's still empty. The building isn't there for 10, 15 years. But nothing new was built over there. And this building was not in such a bad shape, by the way. It could be restored and renovated very easily, but we lost it. And the second question was the Plaza Hotel.
The Plaza Hotel. And actually, what are the guidelines for renovation or restoration of this building if it's a monument?
No, the Plaza Hotel is not a monument. It's not listed. It's a nice building, but it really consists of two parts, no, three parts. You have the water fort, the 19th century fort under the Plaza Hotel, that's listed, but that's government owned. That's not part, really officially not part of the hotel. Then you have the part of the 1950s when it was, the first part was constructed, and that's very interesting architecture, by the way. It's still not listed, but who knows? But I don't think it will be listed soon. And the third one is the tower next to it, and that's also not listed. As most of you will know, the Plaza Hotel was bought recently by the pension fund, and the idea was to do something over there, but till now the plans are not clear of what exactly is going to happen over there. So, but it's not listed, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I have here a fun comment from Josette Vos. She's thanking you very much for your presentation, Josette Vos.
Okay, Josette, hi.
Just a remark, yeah, because she's following us on Facebook and on a PC because the PC speakers are much better. So she's following us on both sides.
Okay.
Thank you, Josette. Welcome. I also want to remind everyone that the recording of this will be sent to you, and or you can follow it again, see it again on our Facebook page of Bumi Maduro Library. And also that the work in progress about race awareness can be seen on Google Earth. We will also put the link for you on our Facebook page so you can see that. I have here, I guess we have time for 3 or 4 more questions. A question here from Tamira La Cruz. Hi, Michael. You mentioned at the beginning that UNESCO considered the multicultural community. So could you comment on how multicultural and community are included in the preservation of the built heritage? Can I repeat the question?
Yeah, how the multicultural community is involved in preservation at this moment, you mean?
Yes, how multicultural and community are included in the preservation of the built heritage.
It is, again, it's not only the investors or the Dutch people who are restoring buildings, which is often thought over here. The first restoration projects were done by local initiative, but also local companies. And also in Otrobanda, a lot of the restoration which has taken place is by the local people. Pietermaai they think it's mostly restored by Dutch entrepreneurs, but it's not the case. They took the lead at a certain moment, but a lot of the buildings are owned by local Curaçao people. And if you, for example, if we look at the Cerro de Otrobanda, there's the hill of Otrobanda, you have people over there who are restoring their buildings and make it economically interesting. Guys like Kurt Schoop, who is restoring, also was one of the first one who restored his house in the Cerro de Otrobanda, which is now part of the tourism development. Is local, and more hill up is local people who see the possibilities, who see the interesting possibilities of the heritage tourism also in Curaçao, and they're making use of it. Fortunately, very fortunately, I have to say it, that a lot of people see the possibilities, and that's the good course, good intention.
I'm looking at, because we have also a couple of followers in our Facebook, on our Facebook page. Also, congratulating you with a very interesting development. One question is here, do the new development of Kleine Wharf damage or fit in the heritage ambiance? So if the new development on Kleine Wharf, if that is damaging the heritage?
No.
Or status as UNESCO heritage?
No, well, it's UNESCO area, but it's not really part of the heritage theme, as we maybe call it that way. It's modern architecture. I don't mind modern architecture, by the way. I mean, if we're building something in 2021. It should look like 2021 and not like 1800, something like that. So modern architecture is not a problem. I think the main problem over here is the height of the buildings, which should be less. But well, a building permit was granted for this constructions, and it's not really heritage minded, but it's part of the development of Schouwloon. So that's the way I see it, in that sense positive, that it's part that will be, it will help to redevelop this area of Schouwloon. But again, the buildings are too high.
Yeah, and I think we have for 2 more before we sign off. And one question here, please explain, it's from Patricia Green, please explain the significance of 10-10-2020.
Well, the significance was that at a certain, how it got so far is that most of the islands thought that the Netherlands Antilles was a burden. There were much too layers in government, so that at a certain moment most of the islands decided that it should be different, and that's how the Netherlands Antilles was eliminated. And the idea always was that with elimination of the Netherlands Antilles, the bureaucracy would become less, but it did not. With the new, at least that's my personal opinion, with a new system of ministries, with a secretary general, with sector directors, with executing departments. The bureaucracy didn't get less. And that's why one of the problems which we have with that permits, which I mentioned, that those monuments permits, that the red tape is not gone. It's still there because of the layers which were created at 10-10-10. But again, that was was things which were chosen by the islands to eliminate the Netherlands Antilles. And well, that's how things changed.
Yeah. And
if it was for
last
the better,
question.
I don't know if it's, I cannot say if it was for the better, but okay, that's the way it is. And as long as the government and the minister and the top civil servants can change it, can see that they have to be more decisive, it can work. And well, elections are next month. I don't want to give an election advice, but again, things have to change in that sense.
Well, we do have a comment here from our Facebook, who's from a viewer who's saying that she will not vote on any party that does not have saving the monuments in their program.
Okay.
So
that's
you're not the only
nice.
one.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's close off with this question. It's a combined question of overall. What could be the role of housing and bring in new permanent inhabitants to the historic districts in its revitalization? And in that sense, what could be the role of, what should the role of Willemstad be? Is there any roles for business, shopping, living accommodations, horeca? What would be the ideal use of the buildings in the inner city?
Well, most of the buildings, for example, Otrobanda it's residential and tourism. It's getting up, for example, especially the hill of Otrobanda is getting more tourism. But I have a lot of discussions often with the shop owners in Punda, the shopping district of Punda, where I always say you have to change your mindset. Curacao people are not going to the inner city anymore for buying their own goods, but buying clothes or something. Because over the whole across the whole island, you will find all kinds of smaller or larger shopping centers where people can buy their things. So the owners and the merchants should change their mindset. And it's happening now, by the way, because they are forced to do it because of the shops getting empty. They are changing their mindset from, according to me, should be living, permanent living, especially on top of the shops, which was the situation in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. People lived above their houses, above the shops. And that's happening now because a lot of the building owners see that they have to change it, and they are converting their second and third floor to apartments. So that's a good development, I think. And the second is that especially Punda should be much more touristic. Of course, you have the cruise tourism, but the cruise tourism cannot do it alone. And the city itself, with heritage tourism, can be much more productive and economically interesting if you have the tourists coming not only to have a stroll through the old city just a few hours, but that you have terraces, that you have restaurants, that you have bars, that you have hotels on the upper floor. By the way, just a few months ago, a student of the University of Curacao, they got her bachelor's degree by doing a study of how, if it was possible to create a hotel on top of 4 or 5 buildings next to each other. It was a very interesting presentation she gave, and that opened up, hopefully, also for building owners that to look at other possibilities for the commercial district of Punda. Again, housing, tourism, and of course the commercial shops, but more quality-wise.
Yes. Michael, thank you much for your presentation. Before I turn the mic over back to Monique, maybe you have a few last remarks, especially on the status of Cinelandia, as we started with that, and we had that in our presentation, in our flyer, which we promoted. So maybe you have any last remarks on the status of Cinelandia and whether or what if we will lose the status of Willemstad as UNESCO city.
No, I don't think if we lose Cinelandia, although I'm not, I want to have it preserved, but I don't think it will be it will influence the status of UNESCO at this stage. We will have to do our utmost to keep it one way or the other, rebuild or not, but something have to happen. But okay, it's at court now. I understand that next week the judge will decide upon it, and we will see what happens. But I want to finalize my story with my fourth chapter is the government. Please be more aware of the things which have to be decided upon. Be more decisive for heritage preservation. Thank you, Lian.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of our webinars. Monique?
Yes. Thank you very much, Michael, and participants. Michael, I think this talk really contributed to the awareness of the importance of our monuments. And the website you mentioned, the new website, it was, can you repeat that?
www.curacaumonuments.org, org, not com, org, O-R-G.
Okay, thank you very much.
Monuments.org.
Yes. You can find all the information about our monuments on that website, also at Mongi Maduro Foundation and also at the National Archives of Curaçao. You can find much more information. This recording will be available, will be sent to all of you, and will also be available on Facebook and on our website. So I want to thank you all for your interesting questions, and Michael for your very good talk. And that was really hard, I think, to put so much information in such a short time, but you managed to do it. Thank you very much. And I think there will be a follow-up because there's so much people are interested in this topic. So I think we should do a follow-up webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, participants.
Nee, ik ben nog aan het recorden, ik ben nog live, dus dan heb je camera. Die.